and Postgres.
Yep.
So yeah, a little bit of intro. Mauricio, if you want to do on the what's this chapter, what you wrote it.
Yeah, totally. So basically, last week I assumed that you covered like chapter 6, which was about like building a small like platform, like a very simple thing to solve like a very specific use case, which was providing kind of like
An
developers
environment. Yeah,
exactly
asking for the
environments to
environment.
work. hmm And I think that this chapter starts talking a little bit about more about what's inside those environments, so developers can work without worrying too much about like the complexity of installing tools into Kubernetes and all that stuff. I wanted to create this chapter just to show a little bit more that side of things. Most of the time, when you work with Kubernetes, you work on installing tools inside clusters and all these things. And for developers, like that's not what they are used to do, right? And I wanted to cover like two different projects that are providing similar approaches, like different abstractions that basically expose APIs to developers so they can use inside their applications without worrying too much about like how do you install these tools inside our clusters. So I'm showing two projects here. One is Dapr, the other one is OpenFeature. And again, they both have like this developer aspect that basically enable developers with a bunch of SDKs or APIs that they can use to build their applications. One is for feature flags. The other one is for more application specific, topics like storing data or emitting events and consuming events. Um, I start with that, like trying to do kind of like a quick analysis of what do applications do most of the time, right? Like applications are all about that, like reading data or storing data, or maybe emitting events or consuming events from other services, and then just probably accessing credentials and and having the right mechanisms to interact with other services whenever they need it. I can like start with that very generic introduction just to say, okay, this is, if you are like a developer coding distributed applications, this is what you will be doing, right? And unfortunately, usually we don't have like standardized APIs to do those things. And that's pretty much kind of like the introduction to go and take a look into the Dapr APIs, which offers like this very generic set of APIs that developers can use to build distributed applications. How did that feel to you when you read about it, like Carlos? Did
Yeah,
it
so
make sense?
and the thing is, because I work for a cloud provider, so we
Mhm,
and I work in the area of infrastructure, Kubernetes, and
mhm,
the companies that I talk to and end users that I talk to, the
mhm,
platform team. Sometimes they call the DevOps team, like the people in charge of the cluster, like creating the
yep,
clusters and give it enough capacity for the app team then to deploy.
mhm,
They think that they cannot help in this area of like the workloads of the
mhm,
applications, and they think that, well, I gave them a cluster, I created a database in the cloud, I created Kubernetes secrets in the namespace, and it's up to them to like create the pod and run the container, and then that my job is done, right?
mhm,
That's the line that they draw. But this chapter is good to have in this book, and I'm going to refer more and more as I do more talks and talk to customers. Is this is an area where you also can accelerate,
yeah,
because you're assuming that your application team are already experts in writing distributed applications. So
mhm,
before Kubernetes, I did this, right? I did this with Java, like application servers took care of this. This is going back to like how people did that.
mhm,
The way that people did that was application servers,
mhm,
aka at that time was Java. Like you have your
mhm,
JBoss, you have your Tomcat, you have your I worked for IBM 20 years, so IBM WebSphere application server. So that was kind of like it solved all these issues for the application developers. Application developers didn't quite care about like where that queue was sitting or how to access the queue or how to redo retries, because their application was running inside an application server. So their coding was like minimum, and bunch of libraries in Java, like they
mhm.
do everything, right? So the amount
Yeah,
of business logic was like snippets, right?
exactly.
And
Yep.
that thing scaled at massive scale for transactions per second, right? And
Mhm,
reliability and security. Like you're not, this bean is not allowed to access that other thing, right?
yeah. And
Um,
if you remember how you do it in Java, basically it was kind of like having some sort of like strings to say, I want to emit a message on this broker, but this broker has a name, and the application server will resolve where that broker is, right?
yep.
As an application developer, I didn't need to know where the broker was or which broker was it. Like I just call a generic API, and the application server will figure it out for you.
Yeah,
Those kind of
standard
APIs.
practices like dependency injection, like with
Hmm.
just an
Yeah.
annotation on a class, like you injected like the
Hmm.
dependencies, right? So
Hmm.
that's why I wanted to talk about that, because that resonates for a certain amount of people. Then
Hmm.
there's other people that never did that. Like they're
Exactly.
writing Rust and they're writing Go
Hmm.
and they're writing Python applications, right?
Hmm.
Node.js application. I was in that transition also. And then like, what do? They're not have an application server where they like everything's
Hmm.
taken care of from them.
Yeah.
So you as a platform team, this is an opportunity for you. If you have a team, like they will take 3 times longer if they don't have an application server, and Kubernetes is not an application server.
Exactly.
So what you're talking here are things that you need to address of like how the apps are going to
Hmm.
communicate, how they're going to be reliable, how they're going to access states, and all these things. Now it's like distributed. It's a distributed problem, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that the kind of APIs that we are talking about here are like application level APIs. Again, it's like
Application.
for application developers, right? Like it's not like the Kubernetes APIs that allows us to run workloads on top of a cluster. This is much more focused on developers and building features for applications.
Yep. So I think this chapter is good because then this chapter explain like what are the things you as a platform engineer can help build better applications, right? What are the things that you can provide? And then that's where you jump like well, you can give them APIs capabilities, right?
Exactly.
This section talks about the type of protocols that you're going to be talking
Hmm.
to things, right?
Yeah.
HTTP and gRPC to do sync
Hmm.
communication between services, or you can do AMQ or Kafka or queuing
Hmm.
for async, and then access to your databases, which is like there's not that many different categories. It's like
Hmm.
you are doing SQL or you're not.
Or you're doing no SQL, right? Like yeah, exactly.
Right?
Hmm.
But there's so many implementations, and you mentioned also like implementations that you have to have the right library and the right driver to put in your client,
Yes.
and then you do that, and then you 6 months later we need to switch to a different database. So what do?
Hmm.
You refactor the
Yeah.
app, right? That
Yeah.
turnaround is painful.
And we have seen that like a lot with Kafka, for example, where if you are building a like very heavy distributed like event-driven applications where every microservice needs to have like the Kafka client, and then for some reason you need to upgrade, for example, the Kafka version to a new major version, then you need to basically re-release all the services that had the client to upgrade the client in every service, right? So there's a tight like coupling there between like the infrastructure that the application needs to run and the application code in there.
Yeah, and
So I
it's
think that every yeah.
and then you have we you have organizations that don't have 3 services. They have hundreds,
Yeah, exactly.
thousands of services, right?
Hmm.
And it could be like you have 100 services using the same Kafka broker. Um,
Hmm.
so then you have to coordinate like how do we like do we do downtime for a week on to upgrade, and then the apps just shut them down until like they have time to switch? Like how do you switch over the second version
Hmm.
on all those things? So the coupling is a challenge. And then
Yeah.
you talk about the service to service interaction challenges,
Hmm.
which is you in HTTP or gRPC, and then this is where you bring in some of the aspects like, yeah. So a lot of people may think, well, if I have a service A talking to service B doing
Hmm.
HTTP, gRPC is like standard, like your SDK HTTP
Hmm.
to talk to, right? The different verbs, but you bring in here like, well, in the distributed system, when you want high reliability, and when the
Yeah.
network it might not be there or be flaky or maybe something, like,
Hmm.
they're not leaving these their services. Like I said at the beginning, right? It used to be these 2 services were inside an application server,
Hmm.
right?
Exactly.
So they were running on on a Java VM, and it was in so the communication was in memory. So
Hmm.
there was no like waiting, like why this thing is slow to talk to the other thing. It's like this, it's an IPC call, right?
Mhm.
But then you take like, well, I have an idea. Let's break this monolith into two containers.
Yep.
So I can
Exactly.
update them differently, different versions. I don't want to wait for the other one. And we have an API contract. Happy.
Mhm.
Everybody's is happy. What happens? The
The network.
things that communicate between them is the network,
Mhm.
right? So now
Yep.
you have like, you have to like, you bring here like retries. If the
Mhm.
first one doesn't work, you have to do retry. And then there's a library that then you start putting what that application server used to have. Now you have to
Mhm.
put it inside both containers, the retries, right? Library and the
Yep.
other libraries.
Yep.
Before that, there's a question.
From
Francisco, do you have a
Francisco.
question? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question, and it's just because I read in the book, but I cannot
Yep.
find the right place now. Maybe it's
Okay.
because it's just, but it's basically something that you mentioned about when you introduce the API, like could be the state store or app subscription API.
Yep.
Basically, you're putting in the platform, but from the point of view of the developer,
Mhm.
how do you manage that? If you start to develop a new application, do you have a kind of local platform version of that? Do
Oh.
you, do you know what I mean? I know that you
Yep.
mentioned something about that, and you say it's so easy to deploy another container
Yeah.
because you can have Kafka. So
Mhm.
when you need to develop in this ecosystem as a developer and even as a
Yep.
platform, what is the
Mhm.
different role? Do you need to provide a kind of local Kubernetes cluster for
That's
him?
You
I,
gave a what do you call
presentation
it?
about that.
No,
Okay.
I read that, and you
Mhm.
gave a thriller, a thriller, a hint about local development, and
Yes.
I got to the end and like, where's the how do I use Dapr in my computer? He never like show it.
Good, good. Okay, that's important. I think that that's a very good question. There are like different ways, right? Like the Dapr project, they have like a CLI that will allow you to set up like Dapr locally without Kubernetes. So for developers to not need a Kubernetes cluster when they are creating their applications, no matter the language that they are using, we have a CLI that will do that for you. So it will basically provision those APIs locally so you can run your applications locally and just communicate with those APIs. But I've been working pretty extensively with a bunch of different projects. One is Dagger, and the other one is test containers to provision these local development experiences without pushing the developer to know much about like Dapr itself. Because
Okay,
as a developer, I only care about the APIs. I really want to use the APIs for building my applications, but I don't really care about how to set up Dapr to work for me, right? Like I just want it to be there. Like I want to start coding and I want to be able to use the APIs. That's pretty much the main
okay,
point. So I can share some links about that because I did a couple of presentations this year
oh,
exactly on
perfect.
that topic on how do we make this development experience good when you are not in Kubernetes.
Yeah, it was this
Perfect.
section 7.7.2.1. So you talk about like, well, this like
Mhm.
adding this extra platform or layer when I'm working locally, right? It's easy to
Yep.
have like a Docker Compose where I have my code,
Mhm.
and then I call like Postgres, which is sitting in another container.
Mhm.
Um, with Dapr, is there a way that you're saying that there's a way to like
Yeah,
run
yeah.
Dapr in my computer and then connect Dapr to the SQL that is sitting in another container, like put it in the middle of the two containers?
Yes, yeah, yeah, 100%. Let me find you the link, and that's called the Dapr CLI, basically.
And
Dapr CLI.
what does it do? Does it run a third container called Dapr, and then your
Yep.
app just connects to that Dapr container?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So basically, it creates a new container. Like it's not the container; it's just to start the Dapr process, basically, just to make it a little bit more lightweight for local development. And then the application can connect to that process, basically.
Oh,
Let me.
so you're saying that I don't have to run my app inside a container. I can just like local dev
Yeah,
running
local dev.
Node.js or Go.
Yeah.
Dapr is running in the
Mhm.
process in my computer,
Yep.
and then Dapr connects to maybe the Postgres. I don't want to run PostgreSQL in my computer. Like, can I run it in
No,
a container?
you run in a container, you run anywhere you want because the Dapr process basically will receive the configuration about where that PostgreSQL instance is. So if you are running it as a container, it's fine. And by default, when you start using the Dapr CLI, basically it will create a default setup where the idea is that you will get, for example, PubSub and a state store out of the box without you needing to configure anything, right? Like it will just start one for you.
State store and which one?
I think that it will use Redis for both, right? Like, so it will start like an instance of Redis that you can use for both for state store and PubSub at the same time. You can do PubSub.
Oh, and PubSub. Okay, PubSub with Redis. Okay.
Yep.
And then that you don't have to change your code if that PubSub becomes Kafka or RabbitMQ,
No.
right? That's the idea.
That's the whole point. Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Did that answer the question, Francisco? I think I had the same question. Like he was going to show.
Sure.
Like convince the person that it's just like it's used to like running his application and the Postgres SQL, like how to go from there to now it's deployed with Dapr in the cluster.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me share here like the presentations that I did. I did one for Dagger. It's this one. That one. And then I did one with test containers. Well, someone else did one with test containers just to show the example that we have here with OpenFeature and Dapr both working outside the cluster, right? So the idea is that, we are using Kubernetes tools, but developers usually don't want to have a cluster. With test containers, you can bootstrap that if you're using Java or some of the other languages that they support.
This one is test containers?
No, that's Dagger, Dagger.io. And then let me find the other one. The test containers one is...
and test containers is good because also it's heavily used in unit testing.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
So you're doing your unit testing with this setup, and it's like emulating the environment that it's actually going to run in Kubernetes, but locally, or a CI pipeline like Jenkins or GitHub Actions or whatever is your Argo workflows.
Yep, that's the whole point.
And then you run that unit test that you run in your computer. I think I put this in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Oh no.
With test containers, right? Like in contrast with the CLI, with test containers, what you can do is you can write all the integration and unit testing using the Dapr APIs without worrying about like starting containers or anything. It will actually have all the configuration for Dapr to bootstrap right beside your application when you're running the tests.
Okay. Yeah. Since you have to go, let's talk more about Dapr. So these capabilities that you were saying, I had questions around where was it? Kubernetes, and then you have these Dapr components. Where's the resiliency policies? So to me, this looks like if a end user comes to me, it usually comes to me saying, I added service mesh. And I was like, why? Oh, because I need encryption when the two pods are sitting in two VMs. And that's not because they want to, like it's regulation, like some certain regulated environments, PCI, HIPAA, health, transaction finance. It's a regulatory saying like if a communication between VM1 and VM2 and the two pods are different VMs, that should be encrypted, not authenticated, but encrypted. But they also say, since using service mesh, mutual TLS, I get a little bit of identity, and then like that service can only be called by another service, and they get those two benefits. The other one is like retries and secret breaker, and like, oh yeah, that's something else that you can take advantage. And in that part, I learned here that it talks about having similar capabilities.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. I think that you can split Dapr. Like the chapter explains how Dapr runs. It runs as a sidecar. That's one of the modes that you can run Dapr. That's the default mode, right? Like if you install Dapr and you configure your workload to use Dapr, it will inject the sidecar very close to your application, so you can use these application level APIs.
Similar to how we still started, right? Installing a sidecar next to your container.
Yes, that because the Dapr project has a sidecar, that basically means that it can do some of the things that like a service mesh can do, right? We actually can do like MTLS at the Dapr level. That's not the problem. We have all the certificate rotation and everything in there, and we do resiliency policies and all these things. But don't forget that the Dapr sidecar basically exposes application level APIs, which is something that service meshes don't do, right? The next thing that I want to tackle is that actually we have in the documentation like a service mesh, a specific section that explains the differences. And it basically says that there is there is nothing bad about using this and Istio together, right? Like there is nothing wrong with that. Like actually, we seen people doing this, and there is no problem.
To
The
use what?
only to use Dapr and Istio together, like in the same
Ah,
cluster, and for
so
Istio for MTLS, basically.
so yeah,
Mhm.
since this is an open forum, like this is a Friday
Yep.
social meeting, sometimes that statement is used. Well, it's used, it's given with good intentions,
Yeah.
but it's received with bad intentions. So because the user then says, okay, then I can have Dapr, which I need
Hmm.
to maintain, update, and run. And you say
Hmm.
like, I can use Istio. Like, yes, I can do that. And then they have like two problems now. I have to maintain Dapr
Yes.
and Istio. Yeah,
Yes.
everybody knows that these things can run in the
Hmm.
same cluster, but you
Well,
should not run them if the capability is offered by one and you only need one capability.
exactly.
Then use service mesh and you have it. If you have
Exactly.
service mesh and it's you sometimes service mesh, I don't know much Dapr, but service mesh
Hmm.
like Istio is, it requires like some level of skills and
Yep.
operations because
Hmm.
it offers more than the retries, right? For example,
Exactly.
um, but
Hmm.
if that Dapr offers the same thing, then go with Dapr because it offers that maybe it's less to configure, or the other way around. Like if Dapr gives you those capabilities, but also give you the abstractions to the database and message queue and
Hmm.
everything, and then don't use service mesh for the retries. Just Dapr is sitting there. Like you're going to have two sidecars. It's too much. So that's why,
Yes.
like I said, like yeah, two things can work in the same team, but in practice, you don't want to do that. You want to pick up the capabilities, right? Um,
Yeah, and again, it really depends on which capabilities do you want. I would I actually recommend to do that, right? Like you have a table of capabilities, and then you just figure it out which capabilities do you need, and if you need both, or if you need one or the other, right? For me, the main reason to include Dapr in this chapter was all about that, enabling development teams
application.
to have the right tools. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of, I guess, the main reason why I didn't cover service meshes here in the book, because I feel that service meshes will give some stuff that teams will need, but usually it's going to enable teams in a different way and different personas, right? In this one, it's all about how do we enable development teams. That's kind of like where the book is going. Um, to take a look at the documentation to see kind of like exactly kind of like the recommendations there. But I've heard both. I've heard people saying, well, we use Istio for for maybe like doing how is it called, like traffic splitting, for example.
Yeah, traffic shifting.
And
Yep.
we don't have that in Dapr, right? Like Dapr wasn't designed for that,
Yep.
right? Like we don't have that feature. So maybe if you need that, and then you need the APIs from the application level point of view, then you basically need both. And we
Yep.
actually have some customers that are using both together, right?
Yeah, and you can use both. The reason was
Mm.
like
It's maintainable.
there's an
It's
overlap of
complicated.
capabilities, so
Yeah.
you're going to have both. Need to decide that
Hmm.
single capability. Are you going to like use it in Dapr, or are you going to use it in service
Yeah.
mesh, right?
Hmm.
And the shifting traffic or
Hmm.
zone, like those type of things, service mesh have access like to cloud providers to know like if there's a zone that is not accessible, it's degraded. It can shift
Yeah.
traffic to the other one, also to avoid costs like
Hmm.
money, right? To for calls to not go cross availability zone, which you pay extra, then it targets spots that are sitting in the same one. So yeah, both can work together. But I see Dapr, the thing that Dapr has, the service mesh is it's just the capabilities, right? The
Yeah.
capability of like the abstraction of the accessing Redis or PubSub,
Hmm.
and then I think those abstracting that access to
Yeah.
the state store, that Redis and database and
Hmm.
message pub is that kind of the big thing in Dapr that I think I see that get a lot of benefits, because as a platform engineer, I don't want to couple, right? Like getting a
Yeah.
database and then giving that secrets into there and then figure out like
Hmm.
how to authenticate using the protocol. You just use local host, right? Because it's in memory. It's like
Exactly.
HTTP. There's no authentication or encryption in that communication on that thing.
Hmm.
So there's like less things that you have to figure out in your code to have the CA. If it's a custom
Exactly.
CA, a lot of people run their own databases in the cloud and they have their own certificates, CA,
Hmm.
SSL certificates, and if you're connect to it, you need that CA in your application. So having Dapr there, like Dapr is the one that you need to configure access to whatever is your database or your store.
Imagine that. So I'm reading kind of like the chat here, and people is asking about like observability, right? And I do see that topic in the same area, right? Like if you're using Istio, you will probably have observability at the networking layer, right? You can have some like layer 7 observability about which application endpoints are being called and all of that stuff. But from the Dapr observability layer, you complement that with actually more like a very specific behavior about like what kind of APIs the application is running. Like if the application is calling the database a lot, or if the application is basically sending a lot of messages, you will get that extra layer of observability on top of whatever like the network is seeing, which I think it's very valuable. And just to close this, the next question that will come after Istio, right, is like, what about Cilium? Because that's also kind of like another space where you can have some of these like service mesh capabilities. So right now I'm trying to work with both teams, like with Istio, with some Istio folks and with some Cilium folks, to figure it out, both like the observability story, but also the capability stories, to say, okay, if you are already using a service mesh, this is kind of like how you configure Dapr to run on top of that. So you don't have an extra problem to figure it out, because it's super true what Carlo was saying, right? Like if you want to use one project, you need to learn about how to use it. If you want to use two projects, you don't only need to learn about the two of those, you need to learn about how they will work together. And that becomes really complicated. So we are trying to simplify that experience for folks out there that are already using some of these, more like service meshes or like networking tools that make a lot of sense in a lot of use cases.
Yeah, and the I think the not the tricky part, but the details around it is like service mesh. At least when they configure, they take over your service, right? They take over your port. So you have a service listening on port 8080. They will take over that port, so the traffic is sent to the Istio sidecar, for example, and then that's where like you're going to talk to that container. You're not talking to it. You're talking to the sidecar. I guess the same thing as Dapr. Dapr like handles that for it. Like if you have something port 8080, will like take over port 8080, and then you're not talking to your service A directly. You're talking to Dapr, right?
So kind of yes or no. You can choose as like, so if you use the Dapr APIs for service-to-service invocations, then you will go through the sidecar.
Yep.
But it's not going to take the port 80. It's not going to sit in front of your service. You will need to use the Dapr APIs, which will go to a different port, and that will use the sidecar communication.
Oh, the client. There's always a client in your application, I guess. Okay. Exactly. So the client takes care of that magic. Where do I talk to? Okay. And the other thing you were saying, observability, is you're saying that Dapr container that is sitting there has metrics that then they get scraped by Hotel or Prometheus, and that metrics is like how much traffic went through it, what type of traffic, or what are information of the database, right? Queries that you did, how many queries you did,
how
and that
long
information
that
will be there.
Yeah.
And then that's something that you don't have to do in your app, because that's the benefit. Also, it's exactly the same as service mesh. That's how service mesh works. Also, does it handle? I know you have to go. Last question. Does it handle tracing?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tracing will be the other question about observability. Okay, Mauricio. So thank you so much. I know you needed to go, but yeah, you answered a lot of questions about Dapr, and then we'll continue on this book and finishing it up.
Take a look at the OpenFeature side of things, because even if I'm showing Dapr in the first half, I think that OpenFeature follow the same idea of, I will give you like a generic API to do feature flagging, and then I will allow you to implement different providers behind the covers, and that will be handled by the platform team, right? It's like, what capabilities can we give developers? We give them all these APIs, and then what do we have in our environments? If it's local, one thing, but if it's like in a cloud provider, maybe it's a third-party services like LaunchDarkly or any other feature provider. So hopefully that helps.
Yep. And what's good that you added to figure out to find another project that abstracts APIs.
And there are a bunch of those, and I keep trying to collect them all and put them together, because I really like the idea. I think that we need to start collaborating more and
application level platform engineering. Yep.
Exactly.
Good. Yep. Thank you so much.
Folks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So you have it. At least Mauricio was able to answer a few of Dapr questions. I heard Dapr for a long time, but never looked deeper into it. Into this week, I was reading on the book and I saw some presentations. There's a question here from Vinod. Vinod, you can speak or I can read it. So security across microservices running Kubernetes is a need that most folks have. Which service mesh seems to address? They also do some abstraction that possible overlaps with Dapr. So yes, so I think that's the discussion that we had on um, security between microservices. Is the resiliency policy, right? That service A is talking to service B, and it looks like Dapr handles the connectivity between the two Dapr sidecars. It goes over HTTPS, and then Marisa says something around that it offers identity and certificates. So that will offer you the layer 7, I guess, the layer 7 security and encryption, similar as a service mesh. That's how service mesh work. And we cover a book from Chris Posta. He's the CTO of Soto, and he wrote a book, and we cover that in the Kubernetes book club. It's a good book if you want to learn service mesh or Istio. I think it was. You look for the name. We cover that one. Istio in action. So if you want to learn more about Istio in action, I think there was a free preview. But Istio in action is a good one if you want to learn about service mesh. Let me put it here in the notes. And then Mauricio also shared a link to service mesh and Dapr, how they compare. So it looks like the Mute TLS is there. There's overlap. So that's I think the answer to the question. We're not on the overlap of Dapr versus with service mesh, right? Dapr doesn't do the traffic routing, doesn't do the traffic splitting, but I was asking about tracing, resiliency, which is exponential backup and retries, and then secret breaker. He mentioned in the chat in the book that Dapr also supports the metrics, which is like slash metrics on that sidecar that you can start collecting information, and then mutual TLS, which is like the identity of like service A is the only service allowed to talk to service B for in terms of like mutual TLS, like or yeah, for a service to identify which services are allowed to talk to me. Resiliency policies, they look like they're called. Let me go back to the top. Where does it cover open features? So yeah, I think that's where we're talking about that. If you want to do that retry, HTTP retries, this is something that you can put inside your app, or you can put it in a sidecar. And that sidecar, it could be Dapr, or it could be like Envoy, right? That you use for the service mesh. Will handle that retries. Also, he mentions here the secret breakers. The secret breaker of the resiliency rate limiting, right? That you don't want to overwhelm a service. And then this is where like he mentions like you need to have the services identity across all of them. And this is something that you can use JW2 tokens in some aspects. I have those identities, and then the policies like who is allowed to talk to service B, kind of thing. So it looks like Dapr has that feature, which is overlaps with service mesh. And then this one is around the configuration of accessing like he mentioned, Redis or a relational database, SQL, where you have to configure the library or the dependency to talk to that database. But he also mentions that I don't know if it was this section or not, that there's might be a corner case or an application team that cannot want to use like a specific version of a client or specific vendor features, and that it's okay to give that escape hatch to the application team, you as a platform team. I think he mentions that at the bottom. And then also credential store is another one. He mentions Vault, so it looks like Dapr, I'm guessing, that has integration with Vault. And basically Vault is a way of like abstracting also like credentials, that you go to Vault to get the latest database access or tokens to talk to your database, and that could be rotated, so your application will be able to get those tokens from Vault. And then he mentions here like also identity of that connectivity to services. Any questions so far? I think I saw Eric joining, or maybe he dropped. More folks join after we started. Omkar, Andrew, Andre, Volodymyr is here. Oh, hi. Yadesh. Yeah, no problem. And there's a question, can Dapr handle WebSocket-based connections? Don't know. That's a good question to ask in the, you can ask in the Slack channel and at Mauricio on it. He mentions HTTP and gRPC. So WebSockets are just HTTP with keep alive. Also, it can be implemented to HTTP too. But that'll be a good question to ask. I don't know. We can look here. Yeah, good questions for Mauricio on that one. I don't know. Okay, so this is the portion I was mentioning that I found interesting, and I sometimes my talks, last talk that I did on platform engineering is like dealing with edge cases. It mentions that there might be teams, application teams that you're working with, you as a platform engineer, that for a good reason they cannot use, for example, Dapr to talk to the message API, and they need a specific client version. Like in this case, it's showing here in the picture that they're going to be using the Kafka client in their application 343 to talk to Kafka 3.x. And it's okay if they want to do it, but they are in charge of like updating the client library to get that, and not the platform team. He mentions that I think later, or maybe he mentioned it here. Yeah, so here it is what I highlighted. So it's okay that the team does that, and the platform team doesn't try to like spend large amount of time just to satisfy that 5% or edge case, to satisfy that team that wants to use that library and trying to come up with a common API in the platform, and they can do that. And then I mentioned like they can wrap that into your broker into do that. Like, for example, wrap that into a separate service and hide it from the, so you still talk to the HTTP but use a specific client. So that's one approach that people can do. I think he mentioned some place that the platform team can delay from optimizing that corner case and offer the platform always offer the application team a escape hatch that people can just, if they don't want to go through the platform APIs that you provide, they can go around it just to make progress, and then eventually maybe the platform team gets to it to cover that corner case. But the platform team should be focusing on like the biggest bottlenecks for the majority of the organization. Yeah, I think this is we discussed. Is a question?
Yeah. Here he suddenly talks about service Y. Is it a typo, or because for modifying service Y, you will need Kafka as expert. the service Y code will need, like, because he was talking about service A, service B, and service C. Suddenly, I don't understand why he is
I
mentioning
don't
about
know
service
where.
Y.
White, like let me see.
Yeah, because I thought it was a typo, and or is it what I am not understanding it?
Which section is that here? Promote APIs that
No,
cover a
down
wide
down to
range.
that. No, down when the same information where you are sharing.
If if these APIs are not enough for all teams documenting and deeply understanding the edge cases, list to new APIs platforms can implement the future version. Oh, I don't see it there. Oh, service Y, this thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. So this is explaining service Y will be like, maybe you have teams like team A, team B, and team C, but team Y has a service and they cannot use the platform APIs that you're given. Like, for example, they cannot use Dapr
Yeah.
to access Kafka or access PostgreSQL. I think he chose the example of PostgreSQL. So they're in charge of like putting that dependency, like the client library, and going directly to the database, and that's okay. If there's a service that wants to go directly to the database instead of going through the Dapr API or the platform API capabilities that you put behind the database, they can go directly. The problem is whenever if the platform team is in charge of upgrading that database and they need to upgrade the database, and the upgrade maybe is not compatible with the dependency that they have, then you need more coordination with that team to make sure that they update the dependency so their application is not broken. So that's the trade-off, right, of the escape hatch, of like having something not following the platform, that when upgrades or like broken dependencies are going to be upgraded, then you break those services. But he said like that's something that is just how life works. If they can go directly, they will go directly, and then maybe the platform team eventually will get there. I think that he mentions here like the platform team can implement in future version of their platform, they can cover that service Y. That's what it means.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can add something more about that, if I may. So, as far I understood, then when he introduced Dapr, somehow he support the point to introduce Dapr just because he's trying to cover the 90%, 95% of the case or the business case that will be covered by Dapr. So basically, the service Y is like a kind of outlier that somehow is acceptable that you make the connection straightforward to the database. Is what I understand.
Yeah, and he mentioned also like do not try to put Dapr on every application like day one, right? If the first iteration you can implement it in most services, then that's okay. You make progress, and then eventually you have time to take care of the other services to put them under your API. In this case, using Dapr, but yeah, your API platform.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it talks about Dapr, and the other section is OpenFeature. Where's the OpenFeature? Oh, here's some of the YAML files. He posting here examples of like, this is what Dapr is going to be concerned in. Like if you have like, if you configure Redis like inside your cluster or like a cloud provider, then Dapr is the one that needs access to Redis, and you will need like a secret reference. In case of a cloud provider, I can talk about AWS. You can also use for certain databases like DynamoDB and Postgres, you can use workload identity so that you can inject the token and you don't have to create secrets. But again, the one that is going to be talking to Redis or Kafka in the cloud or locally is the Dapr sidecar, not your application. So that's the one that you have to authenticate. So that they show here as you create like state store components, those things are the ones that talk to Redis through the Dapr sidecar. I'm guessing the Dapr sidecar, well, that's something that maybe when you look deeper, there's an extra pod that gets created, or it's the sidecar directly talks to Redis. It might be a separate component. Where's the open feature? What's very interesting. Okay, here it is. Feature flags. So this is a concept, and they mentioned two services. Launch Darkly. I know it's a very popular one. And then the other one is, I've never heard this one, Split.io. So this is a practice where you put the features, you implement the features in your service, but not enable for everyone, or not enable at all, or maybe enable for testing and not for production, or enable a feature for a certain set of users, percentage wise, or you select the user. So those flags that you want to dynamically configure them, that they come from a central place. And these two companies offer that service. They put you put an SDK inside your application, and then you connect to their SaaS service and can do it there. But the open feature is kind of relative new. It's from the CNCF project, on a way of creating kind of a standard way of managing these feature flags. So they offer you the standard in this group, which is a CNCF project. It looks like it's still in incubating. But they have the SDKs. So it looks like here they have SDK for Go, the different languages that you put inside your code to get the values dynamically of like those flags. And those flags can have like, he shows an example. So here it is, like you put the open feature SDK, and then there's a flag service that then this SDK talks to. And this is, it's using a config map, but you can also use something else than a config map too, for the flag service to pull the flags values that the feature SDK. So this way, it's a consistent way of configuring feature flags in your Kubernetes applications if you're using this project. So here's an example of feature flags that he has in his application. And also, like I think he mentions like the difficult way of like configuring these feature flags with environment variables and single strings in environment variables, and creating your own thing. Let me see where here it is. So this is like the example that he puts feature flag on all the microservices, the front end, the call for papers, agenda, notifications, and then it connects to the flag D, and then you have the config map, and then the config map, I think he has an example.
I'm not sure whether there is a sync between the page that you are showing and the subject that you are discussing.
Let me see. So I'm talking about the open feature flag, which is shows here, and the flag D aspect
I'm
of
not
it.
saying it, but I'm not sure about others. Yeah,
Oh, okay. Let me stop sharing and share again. Maybe it's not refreshing. How about now?
Yeah, now it's working.
Oh, okay. Maybe it froze at some point. Thank you so much. Let me check if there's any questions. I'm just looking for the YAML file, where to get those events. So this is like eliminating the Kafka client, and then how to subscribe. I think this is subscriptions. Okay, so it's like bringing everything together. Like in this case, this section is talking about both. I think that's why I'm a little bit confused. He's talking about he's using OpenFeature SDK in the conference app, and also he's implementing Dapr in the conference app. So this one shows that all the services will have the OpenFeature SDK with the flag D, and then that where's the, I think let me go up. I was looking for the YAML file that was showing an example. No, this is Dapr. So yeah, he's showing the conference app with the feature flag. I think there was a section that shows a config map on 7. But in this case, he's eliminating the Kafka client, since all these services had the Kafka client to talk to Kafka directly. Now they can eliminate the Kafka client, and then through Dapr they're connecting to the Kafka broker. And then there's this one is, I think it was very interesting. There's a subscription. So one to push a message to Kafka, it's just a standard Dapr client. But there's a subscription one that you can create a subscription object. So this is the one to talk to Kafka. Then this Dapr subscription is kind of cool, because what it does is it's telling it to take information from the broker, take an event from the broker, and basically it's going to send an HTTP request to your application on that route /API/new event. So you should see HTTPs coming into that route, and then the Dapr SDK that is sitting in your application would take those events, and that's how you're going to get your events out. But you don't handle the HTTP handler directly. That the SDK takes care for it. I think he mentioned it here that he's using Go SDK. We call the Dapr component API. So if you want to, this one is for Redis. If you want to get the state of something, basically you say API client get state, and then you get, so this is using the SDK from Dapr to get the state, save the state. That'll be talking to Redis. Publish event will be to publish an event to Kafka, and Mauricio also mentioned that Redis can also be used for like pub and sub. And then this is the feature flag that I was looking for. Sorry it took so much time. So this is the feature flags that he's enabling the agenda service, notification service, and CFP service, enabling for the events enable. And basically you create this in a config map, and then the OpenFeature SDK can get those values out. So that's why he mentions here. And this is using the OpenFeature SDK. You will do the client feature SDK, get object, and then events enable, and then you will get your value if it's true or false. So basically the platform team is working with the application team to have these abstractions, but and then the application team needs to use these SDKs, which is their abstraction. So they only need to the SDKs and the SDK APIs, and then the rest is taken care by the platform team. And yeah, I think that's at the end. He kind of puts everything together of like what we have been talking about, of using platform APIs with GitOps, Argo CD, and Crossplane to create the environments, and the platform team manages those application level APIs to get access to infrastructure. But the applications now will be using SDKs that are open, that then you can change the implementation of the database. And then here it talks about the environment. Now you have like Dapr, open features, observability, because now you can scrape the metrics out of Dapr, and then mutual TLS and certificates for the communication. That's the communication between the services for HTTP. So I think that's it for this chapter. Any questions? And again, this is something that you as a platform engineer, since the book is about platform engineer, you will need to talk to the application team to evaluate this type of abstractions, and then evaluate the tool that you want to use. And one example is, two examples, Dapr and OpenFeature. Mauricio said that he was collecting other tools that kind of implement these APIs, but at this time, Dapr is one of them. And I know for a fact of some end users in EKS are using Dapr in their applications in Kubernetes. And so far, some of them have told me like that they're like happy with it. Like they don't have to think much about it, how to access all these services, that they use Dapr and then call it a day.
The Dapr have the mutual TLS or have other service for this?
Yeah, it has the mutual TLS. Here's, I think it was one of these, where it was. one of these links was comparing. So yeah, it has the mutual TLS, it has the metrics, resiliency, and distributed tracing that doesn't overlap with service mesh.
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
But the majority of the people that use so you can get this with service mesh. What you cannot get with service mesh is the abstraction of the different like Redis or SQL that you can get out of Dapr. Like you don't have to install the Kafka client in your application because you are talking to Dapr through the Dapr SDK, and then that talks to Kafka. And then if you want to change Kafka for something else, RabbitMQ or some other ones, you don't have to change your code as an application. Your application can, in one environment, can use RabbitMQ, another one can use Kafka, or you decide to switch from one to another. You don't have to refactor your applications. Let me see if there's a list in here of the different things that they support for there's a bunch here. So for broker, I know this is difficult to read maybe, but it says here like for state stores, AWS DynamoDB, Azure Cosmos DB, Firebase, Redis, and Cassandra. For PubSub brokers, RabbitMQ, the platforms like SQS, Redis can be pub and sub, bindings and triggers. So this one is around Kafka, Twilio, AWS S3. So all these APIs, they abstract for you. So you in your application, you choose the Dapr SDK. The same thing for observability and tracing. They have that.
Remove the locking, the software, right? I only use the Dapr for building the systems, and I don't have a locking.
To have what?
If I use the Dapr, I don't have locking in my developer team because use the SDK for Dapr for connect.
So your development team will need to integrate the Dapr client SDK into their applications, and then from that application, use the right SDK to communicate to these backend services.
Okay, good. It's amazing service. I don't know because I enter in finish the 3-year call, but I like the system. For me, it's new. It's amazing system. Thank you.
Thank you so much for attending. So I think that's it. We're out of time for today, but yeah, we learned, at least I learned about 2 new technologies, Dapr and OpenFeature from the CNCF. And then this is a space on platform engineering that is very good to look into it. Like after you deal with the infrastructure, then how do you deal with the applications? This is an alternative of the platform engineering kind of helping out to kind of like offer these backend services to the application team through an SDK, a single SDK. Okay, so we'll see you next week. Next week is chapter 8 of the book. Try to see if you can read that chapter, and then we'll be here. I will check if Mauricio will be here, but definitely I'm not traveling, so I'll be here another Friday, just hanging out and talking about Kubernetes and talking about this book topic. So appreciate and thank you so much for attending. See you next week.
See you.
Thank you.